You don't pull a gun on someone who trained the Navy SEALs. But that's exactly what the HOA so-called neighborhood cops did. And they had no idea the quiet woman watering her garden was the kind of person elite military forces fly in to learn survival from. That woman is my wife. We moved into this gated community after years of high-pressure assignments and deployments, thinking we'd finally earned some peace. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where my wife could slow down, breathe, and maybe even pretend she was just another civilian. The houses were clean, the neighbors polite, and the lawns so manicured they looked fake. It was all too perfect. But perfection, we learned quickly, was just another mask for control, especially when the HOA was run like a miniature dictatorship. The first few weeks were uneventful. My wife kept to herself, spent time in the backyard designing a small survival garden, nothing extreme. Just basic food crops, a rain collector, and a discreet storage shed tucked under some ivy, where she kept emergency supplies. For her, it was second nature. Years of training meant you never assumed safety, even in the quietest of neighborhoods. She didn't want attention, just self-sufficiency. But unfortunately, self-sufficiency looks threatening. Two people who obsess over rules they barely understand. It started with looks. Passive-aggressive comments at the mailbox like, "That's quite the military setup back there." Or, "You know the HOA has guidelines about unsightly storage buildings." My wife would just smile and nod, not offering them the satisfaction of a reaction, but I could see it in her eyes. She was watching, noting, analyzing. That's what she always did. Then came the notices. Handwritten complaints tucked into our doorframe, citing vague violations like unauthorized construction, improper use of landscaping, and potential safety hazards. HOA Karen, as we later learned the head of the association, was lovingly referred to by the neighborhood teens, had a particular interest in our property. Rumor had it, she was something maybe, a former bureaucrat who missed the power. She took it upon herself to enforce community order, which mostly meant bullying anyone who didn't fall in line with her outdated Pinterest-inspired vision of suburban bliss. My wife, however, wasn't someone who bent easily, especially not to self-appointed tyrants. "Let them watch," she'd say calmly while pruning the tomato plants or tightening the support beams on her rain shelter. "Watching is safer than trying something stupid." Little did we know, stupid was coming. It happened one hot Thursday afternoon while I was at work. My wife had just finished adjusting the solar charger she'd rigged for emergencies, when two golf carts came rolling up the side of our yard. These weren't the friendly, retired neighbor types. They wore dark polo shirts with HOA security printed on the chest and utility belts that suggested they watched too many cop shows. One even wore mirrored sunglasses like he was ready to join a SWAT team. They didn't knock, they didn't call. They just stormed onto our property like it was a war zone. According to the footage from our security cameras, which we thankfully had, they made their way straight toward the shed. My wife saw them coming, and the moment she noticed the one on the left was carrying an actual firearm, her demeanor shifted. No fear, no confusion, just precision. She didn't make sudden movements. She didn't yell or challenge them. She simply stood still, let them speak first, and waited. "Ma'am, step away from the structure. Now." The taller one shouted it like he was giving orders on a battlefield. She raised an eyebrow but complied. Calm, hands at her sides. She slowly stepped away. "You can't be here without a warrant," she said flatly. That clearly rattled them, especially when she didn't raise her voice. She was too calm, too confident, and in their minds, that meant danger. Because bullies aren't afraid of loud people, they're afraid of people who don't flinch. "We've had reports of suspicious activity on this property," the other one chimed in, hands twitching near his belt like he wanted an excuse to act tough. "Are you armed?" My wife didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "Define armed." That didn't go over well. The man with the firearm stepped closer, raising his voice. "Ma'am, for your safety and ours, I need you to stay still while I secure the perimeter." That's when my wife noticed his finger wasn't just near the trigger, was on it. That crossed the line. She had faced real combat. She'd trained soldiers in high-risk zones, taught them how to disable threats with nothing more than string and a spoon. And now, here she was, facing a nervous HOA cowboy with a gun and no sense of control. She had already made a decision. "I'm not your threat," she said slowly, eyes locked on his butt. "If you keep pointing that thing, I will become your problem." They didn't know who they were dealing with. This woman had spent her life preparing people for worst-case scenarios. She could disappear in a forest for weeks. She could turn plastic utensils into weapons. She could disarm a trained soldier in under 5 seconds and still be polite about it. But what terrified these two wannabe officers the most was that she wasn't even trying yet. And that, more than anything else, was the warning they ignored. It started with something as simple as a letter, neatly folded and taped to our front door, with the HOA's official logo at the top and a tone so passive-aggressive it practically dripped with entitlement. "Dear resident," it read, "we've received concerns regarding unapproved modifications to your backyard. Please remove the unauthorized structure immediately, or face fines and potential board action. My wife read it once, raised an eyebrow, and chuckled. They're talking about the shed, she said. I nodded. Of course they were. It wasn't just a shed, it was a carefully designed, low-profile survival storage unit that my wife had constructed herself using camouflaging materials, solar panels, and smart ventilation. It blended in so well with the surrounding greenery that unless you knew what to look for, you'd miss it completely. But someone had noticed. Someone had taken offense. And in an HOA-controlled neighborhood, offense often translates to action. My wife didn't argue or respond right away. She believed in observing before reacting, always letting people reveal their intentions. Instead, she continued working on the garden, installing a rain collection system, trimming the vines, and making sure the vertical herb wall she'd built was getting enough sun. All practical, sustainable additions to our yard. Nothing noisy, nothing dangerous, but apparently, different was enough to trigger alarms. That week, the golf carts started appearing more frequently, not the ones driven by sweet retirees waving to neighbors, but black ones with security logos slapped on the sides and cheap sirens mounted to the roof. They circled the block more than usual, always slowing down when passing our house, sometimes even stopping entirely just outside our fence. Inside were men dressed in black polos, dark sunglasses, and utility belts that looked more cosplay than professional. My wife noticed their routines, their timing, even how one of them always had a body camera turned on. She didn't say much about it. She just started keeping our outdoor cameras recording 24/7. If they're going to play surveillance, she said, we'll play it better. Then came the second letter. This one was bolder, almost accusatory. Residents have reported unusual equipment and behavior consistent with paramilitary activity. You are required to schedule an inspection with the HOA Compliance Committee within 7 days. That's when I lost my patience. I wanted to call them, confront them, drag them into a real legal conversation, but my wife simply placed the letter down, folded her hands, and said, not yet. Let them keep pushing. They'll show their hand. And push they did. A week later, we received another notice of violation, citing us for unapproved landscaping, obstruction of common views, and suspicious materials stored on premises. That one was personally signed by Karen Delaney, the head of the HOA, and a woman with a reputation for making everyone's life more difficult. People called her Karen with a clipboard. She believed she ran the neighborhood like a general. Running a forward operating base, she had turned a harmless HOA role into a full-blown authority fantasy, complete with custom uniforms for her neighborhood watch security team, and an ever-expanding list of infractions she handed out like candy. I'd seen her in action, marching down sidewalks, measuring lawn heights, confronting teenagers about loitering at the basketball court. She had no background in law enforcement, no military history, but she acted like she was leading an task force. She was the type who believed her laminated badge made her the law. And now, she had decided that my wife was a problem, a threat. I remember one afternoon clearly. My wife was outside, working in the garden, dressed in cargo pants, a tactical belt with basic tools, and a headset that linked to our home's intercom. It was hot, and she had tied her hair up, face focused, body moving with the kind of precision most people never notice unless they're trained to look for it. But to Karen and her crew, that was enough to raise the alarm. That's when the patrols started doing more than watching. One evening, as we sat on the porch, a golf cart actually pulled halfway into our driveway, engine idling, and stayed there for nearly 5 minutes. My wife sipped her tea, watching them through her sunglasses, not moving an inch. They didn't get out. They just sat, radioed something in, then backed out and left. It was clear they were testing her, seeing if she'd confront them, make a scene, give them a reason to escalate. But she never did. They're waiting for a reaction. She told me they're dying to justify their paranoia. Karen sent another letter a day later. This one stating that the HOA would be conducting an emergency security review of certain homes, with or without the residents' presence, citing community safety as justification. That was the final straw. My wife drafted a legal response, citing trespassing laws, state-level homeowner rights, and privacy protections. She didn't threaten, she warned. If anyone steps onto our property without a proper warrant, they'll be dealt with accordingly. The next day, the HOA hosted a neighborhood safety seminar, pure theater. Karen stood up front, dramatically talking about external threats, unknown behaviors, and how the community must remain vigilant. She never mentioned us by name, but everyone in that room knew who she was talking about. And the worst part, some people believed her. Fear has a way of spreading, even when it's built on nonsense. A few neighbors stopped waving when they passed by. Some whispered when we walked our dog, but others, the ones who knew who my wife was at least vaguely, began to shift uncomfortably, unsure if they were siding with the wrong people. The tension grew by the day, and then, just like that, everything escalated. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was running errands, and my wife was in the backyard, tuning the filtration system and checking the emergency gear in the shed. She was wearing gloves, Her headset, a multi-tool clipped to her belt, and a hydration vest. It looked practical, but to someone already suspicious, it must have looked tactical. That's when they made their move. 2 carts rolled up the side of the property, faster this time, no hesitation. 2 men got out, one with a clipboard, the other with a firearm on his hip. They came in hard, barking orders, shouting step away from the shed like they were clearing a bunker. They didn't ask questions. They didn't identify themselves properly. They just stormed onto the property, adrenaline high, looking for a target. They found one, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with. They didn't knock, they didn't even announce themselves properly. 2 men in black HOA security polos stormed across our backyard like they were hunting a fugitive. One had a clipboard and a walkie-talkie strapped to his vest like he was part of a tactical unit, and the other unbelievably had a handgun holstered like this was some kind of high-stakes SWAT operation. To any regular person, this would have been terrifying. But to my wife, this was just another badly planned intimidation tactic. She clocked them the moment they stepped onto the gravel path. From their awkward formations to their lack of basic concealment, she instantly knew these weren't professionals. She could tell by the way they held themselves. They didn't know how to control a scene. They only knew how to pretend. She continued calmly watering the basil like nothing was happening until the one with the gun barked an order. "Ma'am, step away from the shed with your hands visible." Her response was so simple, so devastating in its delivery, it would later become a meme online. She turned her head just enough to look at them and said, "You first." The guy didn't know what to do with that. It threw him off completely. He repeated the order, this time stepping forward, trying to sound tougher. My wife slowly turned, hose still in one hand, and took a step back from the shed. "You're trespassing. This is private property. What authority are you claiming?" The clipboard guy fumbled with some excuse about HOA bylaws and suspicion of unauthorized equipment stored on site. She didn't laugh, but her eyes said everything. These clowns thought they were enforcers of law because they had radios and a badge stitched on their shirts. But law enforcement, they were not. "Where's your warrant?" she asked. The man with the gun stepped closer, hand twitching near the weapon. "I don't need a warrant. I have authority under Section 7 of the HOA safety protocols." My wife narrowed her eyes. She knew those so-called protocols didn't override constitutional rights. And she definitely knew no one from the HOA had legal right to come armed onto private land. Still, she didn't react. Not visibly. Internally, she was making dozens of calculations per second. Distance, wind, weight distribution, weapon draw time, potential escape routes, number of civilians in surrounding houses, even what kind of training they might have. It was all automatic to her now. That's what decades of surviving live field scenarios does to you. The situation escalated when the clipboard guy circled around to the shed and reached for the handle. "Step away from there," she said sharply. He paused. That's when the man with the gun took it too far. He raised the weapon not fully, but enough that it was no longer holstered, no longer neutral. That was the moment everything changed. My wife's expression didn't alter. Her breathing remained steady. But what happened next unfolded in under 3 seconds. In a flash, she dropped the hose, pivoted on her back foot, and closed the distance. To the armed man, before he could react, she'd angled her body out of his line of fire, gripped his wrist with a pressure point lock, twisted it up and away, and disarmed him so cleanly that the gun dropped to the grass with a soft thud. His knees buckled not from injury, but from sheer confusion and the shock of being completely outmatched. She held his wrist for a heartbeat longer than necessary and then released him with a small push, sending him stumbling backward. With her foot, she slid the weapon away from him and stood still, arms down, watching both of them. "I'm giving you one chance to leave this property," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "You came here armed, without authority. You just attempted to intimidate a civilian with a deadly weapon. Do you understand how badly you've screwed up?" Clipboard guy looked like he wanted to vanish. He stammered something about calling Karen and getting clarification. My wife didn't move. "Call whoever you want, but if you take one more step toward that shed, I won't be so patient." It was then that one of the neighbors, Mr. Harlan, an older gentleman from 2 houses down, peeked over the fence. He had heard the shouting and seen the confrontation. He pulled out his phone and began recording, narrating what he saw with growing disbelief. "This woman just disarmed a man twice her size," he whispered. "She didn't even break a sweat." The HOA security team clearly didn't know what to do. Their radios crackled, but they didn't answer. They backed off slowly, trying to maintain some dignity, even though it had been shattered the moment the gun hit the grass. "This isn't over," the man with the disarmed weapon muttered. "Oh, I know," my wife replied. "You should. Pray it is." With that, she turned and walked back toward the porch, picked up the hose, and resumed watering her plants like nothing had happened. The absurdity of it all only made it more powerful. These men came expecting fear, chaos, maybe even tears. What they got was a masterclass in control, awareness, and strength. A complete psychological takedown. executed without a single unnecessary movement. When I got home later that day, she calmly handed me the security footage and explained everything. In detail, I was furious, but not surprised. She had warned me that someone would eventually mistake her silence for weakness, that someone would push too far. "What do you want to do with the footage?" I asked. "Send it to the HOA. She shook her head. "No, send it to the sheriff. Let them see what kind of militia Karen thinks she's running." And we did. And what came next was a storm Karen and her officers never saw coming. The footage was undeniable. It showed everything: two armed HOA security enforcers illegally entering our property, confronting my wife with raised voices, and one of them drawing a gun on her. Then, in a blur that slowed down with every replay, it captured the moment she disarmed him with a move so clean, so fast, and so precise, it didn't even look real. The way she maintained control, neutralized the weapon, and never once escalated the situation. That part was what made it truly remarkable. She didn't hurt them, she didn't retaliate. She simply removed the threat. Then she told them, flatly and without fear, to leave, and they did. I watched the footage 5 times that night, not out of disbelief but out of awe. I knew my wife was capable of that. I'd seen her teach similar moves during a private military training exercise years ago. But watching her go from watering tomatoes to tactical dominance in 3 seconds flat still left me stunned. "They're lucky you didn't really engage," I said. She nodded slowly. "If I had, they'd be leaving in an ambulance, not a golf cart." The next morning, we didn't have to do much. The footage had already gone public. A neighbor's doorbell camera caught the audio. Another across the street had a clear shot of the weapon being drawn. And Mrs. Donnelly's video from her second-floor window showed the entire encounter from start to finish, ending with the best quote of the entire incident: "You came here with a gun. You can leave without it." That line exploded online. Social media grabbed hold of it, and before we'd even contacted a lawyer, the clip had been stitched into reaction videos, uploaded to Reddit, shared across Facebook neighborhood groups, and even made it to a few major news outlets. A local news station ran a segment: "Decorated survival instructor disarms HOA gunman in backyard standoff." The headline made it sound like a movie, and to many it was, but for us, it was just the inevitable result of unchecked authority meeting real discipline. Then the sheriff called. Not a deputy, not a receptionist, the sheriff himself. He'd received the footage, reviewed the legal documents we submitted, and already had a team looking into the HOA's unauthorized use of security personnel. His tone was respectful, firm, and borderline apologetic. "Your wife's conduct was impeccable," he said. "What those men did was not only reckless, it was criminal. The HOA has no jurisdiction to send armed individuals onto private property, especially not with threats and no legal backing." He informed us that both men were being brought in for questioning. One was charged with brandishing a weapon without proper certification. The other was under investigation for aiding and abetting in an illegal detainment attempt. And Karen, she wasn't off the hook. "We're opening a broader investigation into her authority," the sheriff added. "Looks like she's been misrepresenting her power for a while." That night, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. Karen tried to get ahead of the story. She stood at the podium in the clubhouse and gave a speech that sounded rehearsed, defensive, and completely it. "We were acting on concerns for neighborhood safety," she said, pacing dramatically. "When unusual activity is reported, it is our duty to act swiftly and decisively." She made herself the hero in her own twisted narrative. Claimed my wife had refused multiple compliance notices. Claimed we were hoarding survivalist gear and scaring the children. But the crowd didn't buy it this time. The room, filled with curious neighbors, wasn't buying into her fear. Mutton or several had already seen the video. Some even applauded my wife. Mr. Harlan stood up mid-meeting and said loudly, "If that woman wasn't calm and professional, someone would have gotten shot. And it wouldn't have been her." Karen's face paled. The support she once held in that room evaporated instantly. One by one, neighbors began speaking up. "She never bothered anyone," one said. "She helped me fix my water line last week." Another added, "I feel safer knowing she's next door." Karen tried to maintain control, but the narrative had shifted. She was no longer the protector, she was the instigator. The sheriff's office issued an official statement that evening. "No HOA in this county has the legal right to authorize or deploy armed personnel. All such operations must be handled by official law enforcement." The fallout came quickly. The HOA board suspended all security operations, pending legal review. Karen was placed under investigation for misuse of power, impersonation of a public officer, and incitement. Community trust, once eroded by her constant surveillance and threats, was shifting back toward unity, common sense, and actual safety. Over the next few days, people who had once avoided us now came by to apologize, offer support, and ask if there was anything we needed. My wife, always composed, accepted their words with grace. She didn't hold grudges. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than anything they could say. One of the most powerful moments came 2 days later, when a group of neighborhood teens delivered a handmade sign that read, Lot 27 Respect, the real one. They planted it at the edge of our garden, surrounded by flowers. My wife smiled, faintly, placed a hand over her heart, and nodded. That's better than any medal, she whispered. Behind the scenes, legal repercussions were moving forward. The HOA's budget was frozen. A lawsuit was quietly being assembled on behalf of affected homeowners led by a team of attorneys we didn't even have to hire. They volunteered. Apparently, what happened here resonated beyond our quiet little community. It sparked national conversations about overreaching HOAs, fake security patrols, and the weaponization of suburban power structures. Podcasts, news outlets, even local councils began referencing the incident as a case study in what happens when authority goes unchecked. And at the center of it all stood my wife, the woman they tried to scare, whose strength didn't come from intimidation, but from experience, clarity, and an unshakable calm. She didn't just stop them. She exposed them. Not with violence, not with vengeance, but with truth. And the truth, it turned out, was something even an HOA couldn't control. In the days that followed, the neighborhood didn't just change, it transformed. What was once a quiet but tense community ruled by HOA, fear, and passive-aggressive letters turned into a place buzzing with new awareness. Whispered apologies and long overdue confrontations. My wife never asked for any of it. She never wanted fame, recognition, or even revenge. She just wanted peace. But peace had to be earned on sometimes. Defended after the footage of the HOA incident went viral. It wasn't just our local community watching anymore. News stations reached out. Military forums circulated the clip. Survival training communities praised her restraint, and legal analysts dissected every frame. Headlines called her the calm force of suburbia, the tactical gardener, even the woman who shut down a HOA with a look. We received interview requests from national media, podcasts, even documentaries. She declined almost all of them. This isn't a performance, she said. It's a warning for every person being quietly bullied by fake authority in their own home. But while she stayed out of the spotlight, the HOA did not. Karen's entire facade collapsed faster than anyone expected. Within a week of the incident, formal charges were filed against her. Negligence, conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, and organizing unauthorized security patrols with firearms on residential property. The sheriff's investigation uncovered years of misconduct, illegal fines issued without board votes, tampered complaint records, selective enforcement against homeowners she didn't like, and even misuse of HOA funds. What started as a neighborhood nuisance spiraled into a full-blown legal disaster. The HOA board was forced to dissolve temporarily. A county-appointed mediator stepped in. Every policy Karen had enforced was suspended. And with her power stripped away, the real stories started to surface. One neighbor, a single mom, admitted Karen had fined her for excessive trash bin noise just days after she refused to volunteer at a HOA event. Another neighbor, a veteran with PTSD, revealed that the HOA security patrols used to shine flashlights into his window at night, claiming they were checking for suspicious activity. It was abuse wrapped in bureaucracy. My wife became a symbol not because she wanted to be but because she had done what others were afraid to do. She stood her ground, not with anger or rebellion, but with quiet, undeniable power. One afternoon, a local veteran group visited us, unannounced, 3 men and 1 woman. All former service members. They came not to ask for advice or share war stories, but to say thank you. People like her, the oldest one said, they remind us what right looks like, what calm in the storm feels like. They gave her a small plaque that read, "Honor isn't given, it's revealed under pressure." She didn't cry, but she kept that plaque in her shed next to her training gear. The neighborhood began healing in small but meaningful ways. Neighbors who used to avoid each other started talking. People offered to repaint the HOA office building to make it feel less like a command center and more like a welcome space. The new temporary board held open meetings, allowed questions, and even hosted a backyard potluck to rebuild trust. And for the first time since we moved in, my wife walked through the neighborhood without eyes watching her suspiciously instead. People smiled, waved, nodded with genuine respect. It wasn't just her reputation that changed. The HOA's entire identity had to evolve. Gone were the patrols. Gone were the random citations. They were replaced by transparency, accountability, and, most importantly, humility. The board passed new regulations prohibiting the use of any private security forces without coordination from official law enforcement. They banned arbitrary fines and created a community vote system before any new policy could be enforced. It was a complete reset. And it was necessary. But not everything was restored, so Karen, humiliated and facing charges, left town. Before her court hearing, no one threw her a goodbye party. The house she once patrolled like a queen sat empty, for sale sign in the yard fading in the sun. Her fall from power was so complete it became its own cautionary tale. People spoke of her not with anger anymore, but disbelief. How could one person turn a peaceful neighborhood into a battlefield of petty rules and fear? My wife's answer was always the same, because no one stopped her sooner. As for us, life returned to a quiet rhythm, but better, stronger. My wife began offering private weekend workshops for women in the community: basic self-defense, situational awareness, emergency prep. They weren't about turning people into warriors. They were about teaching confidence, awareness, and how to hold your ground with purpose. The first class had 5 people. By the 3rd week, she had to move it to a local park to fit everyone. Mothers, daughters, even a few elderly residents came with walking sticks and curiosity. They all left standing taller. One teenage girl who'd once called my wife intimidating now called her coach. That shift, seeing fear replaced with inspiration, was what she valued most. That was the real victory. One night, as we sat under the patio lights, sipping tea, I asked her, "Do you think Karen learned anything from all this?" My wife thought for a moment and said, "Maybe not. But everyone else did. And that's what matters." The garden was blooming. The rain system worked perfectly. Our shed, once called suspicious, was now admired for its ingenuity. Peace had returned, not because someone gave it to us, but because my wife defended it with everything she knew. Without shouting, without violence, just presence, precision, and patience. She didn't change to fit the neighborhood. She changed the neighborhood around her, and that made all the difference.